and welcome to this edition of Hidden History Stories from the Secret City. Looks a little bit different. Our screen does this morning because we've got a special guest who's going to give us a presentation. I'm here with my co-host Ray Smith. Good morning, Ray. How are you?
I'm very good, Keith. How are you today?
I am good. I am good. Why don't you introduce our guest? We'll get right into our topic this morning.
I'd be happy to do that. I'm glad that we have Alex Gabbard with us today. Alex has a book that he's written. You can't see it very well there. Let me see if I can get
Hold it closer to you.
Oh, I know what it is. There you go. Okay, that's his book. Now he's written another one, a book about Thunder Road. But we won't be talking about that today, but you just need to know that he has done the adventures of an H-bomb mechanic, and he's going to talk to us a little bit about just some of his experiences working in the military. So, Alex, take it away.
Okay, well, good morning. What I'll do is to go through some historical background briefly, and then get into substance of an installation in Tennessee, Clarksville base. That was a secret base inside Fort Campbell, and most people don't know it even existed. So that's the nature of secrecy. I'll begin with a portion of a presentation that I put together with the gadget. Historically, gadget was the device that was detonated as a test, the Trinity test in Alamogordo, New Mexico, July 16th, 1945. This photo is the Trinity in its preparation. The next slide shows what happened when the Trinity device exploded. This is the fireball in time sequence. In the first 600ths or 6,000ths of a second, the fireball was this big. 10,000ths of a second later, it was this big. And this thing right here that you see, that is a Joshua tree that is about to be consumed in the fireball. This was approximately a 20 kiloton atomic bomb test. The Trinity device was that demonstrated how to make an implosion type weapon. There were two types of fuel, uranium-235 and plutonium-239. The weapons that were dropped on Japan, this little boy, August 6, 1945. And the Fat Man, this was gadget in bomb form. It's the same device, just put together with an aerodynamic fairing. And this was a few days later. This is the second blast that ended World War II. So that's a little historical background. There's a great deal of history involved. If I can find my way through my presentation here, we'll move up to modern day. For example, this image shows the B-29, characteristic of the weapons of the Air Force during World War II, and then the B-36 that was required for the next generation thermonuclear weapons. The bombs were so big and so heavy, it required an aircraft the size of the B-36. Later, the B-52 Stratofortress, which became the strategic bomber for the Strategic Air Command of the Air Force. It's still in flight, by the way, still in service, although introduced in 1955. The weapons had become much, much, much smaller and easier to handle, and the aircraft did not have to be as big. An example of the types of weapons that were handled, the Mark 14, this was 6.9 megatons. These are all thermonuclears. This is a Mark 15. This yield had a yield of 3.8 megatons. Now, remember 20 kilotons and what it looked like from Trinity, and 3.8 megatons is that much bigger. This particular weapon looked like this on the inside. It had several different fusing mechanisms that would allow it to produce different kinds of yields. This would be a strategic weapon. Strategic is anything above 1 megaton. Tactical is anything below 1 megaton. The reason for the B-36 was this weapon. This was the Mark 17. This was the largest and most explosive weapon ever built in this country at 15 megatons. And at 25 feet long, you can see that it required a massive aircraft to handle it. As the weapons progressed through designs, they got smaller and smaller. This Mark 7 has a yield of up to 61 kilotons. This could also be rocket launched. That is, the rear section could be removed and a rocket engine could be attached to it. And it could be launched from any kind of aircraft. From these two bungs could be loaded under the wing of any type of aircraft. In my day, this is the kind of equipment that we use to service these weapons. I never serviced any of the older weapons, only the modern weapons, modern as of the 1960s. As the weapons program that developed post-World War II, Armed Forces Special Weapons Project, changed into DASA, Defense Atomic Support Agency. Once the weapons got to the point of being small, as in just a nose cone weapon, these rockets were all nuclear tipped rockets. These were intermediate range ballistic missiles. And you can see from the scale man here that the rocket itself, just to deliver this little package up here, involved all of this enormity of support and structure. The ICBM types were bigger rockets, but in every case, their delivery payload was just a small weapon in the nose cone. That weapon could be one or more. The types of delivery systems were any kind of rocket or any type of gun. The Navy guns could be configured to fire a shell, that is one of the 16-inch guns off of a battleship, could fire a 20 kiloton. We called them Katie. We sailors attached to Navy female names to hot-headed things like Katie, KT, or Lulu. This was a anti-submarine weapon that we had. As the rocketry got better and better with telemetry and control, then these small warheads that could be placed just in the nose cone of a rocket, like a Polaris 1, or 3 warheads in a Polaris 3, or multiple warheads in a Poseidon. The rockets themselves were launched from submarines submerged as deep as 650 feet, would break the surface and fly through whatever the trajectory was to their target. The types of weapons that I was associated with on the USS Forrestal, this was an attack aircraft carrier, which I was crew after I left Clarksville base. This aircraft carrier, like all CVAs, carried 2 full magazines of nuclear weapons, enormous firepower, hundreds, literally hundreds of weapons divided between the forward and the aft SAS spaces, that special aircraft security spaces. The reason for having two is that the mission of the ship, if one magazine was taken out, perhaps the other one could fulfill the mission. These ships carried enormous firepower. The types of things that were typical of my time was the Mark 28. This was a multiple warhead configuration. You can see the bungs that could be mounted under the wing of an aircraft, any type of aircraft. This is an aerodynamic fairing. So this would be for any type of delivery from under wing. This weapon was very, very sophisticated. It had multiple yield capabilities simply by dialing whatever yield you wanted, up to 1.45 megatons in the same package. The Lulu that I mentioned earlier was anti-submarine weapon. Also, you can see the bungs there. It could be mounted under wing, and it could be dropped from any kind of aircraft, even a helicopter that could carry this weapon. It was small enough and light enough. So these are the types of weapons that I was familiar with, that I trained on. For example, the warhead itself of the Mark 28 could be configured in all kinds of ways for internal or external, with aerodynamic fairings or non-aerodynamic fairings, to end up to look like any one of these configurations, or the weapon itself could be mounted inside a delivery rocket of some type. These are early day cruise missiles. The types of weapons got smaller and smaller to this Mark 43. This was a weapon that I serviced. These are actually built at Clarksville base. This was a plutonium weapon. It had yield up to 1 megaton, so that would put it in a strategic category, or less than that for tactical, but the lowest yield was 70 kilotons. And remembering that Trinity was 20 kilotons, it tells you that this was much, much, much more powerful. The warheads themselves got increasingly smaller and lighter weight to the ASROC. This is anti-submarine rocket. This was the Mark 44 warhead.
Alex, I have a question for you. You're talking about strategic and tactical.
Yes.
Explain that, the difference in those just a little bit.
Strategic was 1 megaton and up.
Yeah.
Tactical is below 1 megaton. I don't know who made that designation, but that was what was referred to as in the training and what I was familiar with. Strategic would be to take out a complete military installation or a complete city.
Uh-huh.
Whereas tactical would be to take out a particular target, a ship, a submarine, like the ASROC, for example.
Okay.
At 10 kilotons. Now imagine you saw what Trinity looked like and how big it was for 20 kilotons. This is half of that, and it's a foot in diameter.
Right.
So the warhead itself had become very, very, very much smaller and easy to be delivered from any type of launch platform.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. That helps.
Okay. Now this is an example of what the ASROC. Anybody who's seen World War II movies of destroyers dropping depth charges off the back of the ship, and you see a big plume of water. This is what 10 kilotons from an ASROC does. Here's the ship, and you'll notice that it's broadside. This was a test to see if the ship could endure its own shock wave. And there goes the rocket. It sinks to 650 feet and detonates. That's the plume of water. As it broke the surface, this has become the mushroom cloud. It got bigger and bigger. That shows you what 10 kilotons underwater would do as an anti-submarine weapon. The kinds of aircraft launch, like the Mark 45 or Terrier, this would be to intercept aircraft, bombers, anything of that nature that would be delivered, an enemy might want to deliver. At the time that I was servicing these weapons. This was the largest, the B-53. I was on the B-53 team at Clarksville. This was a 9 megaton single yield weapon. It had one purpose, and that was to destroy Moscow in a single blast. And at 9 megatons, it had about a 30-mile radius, and then beyond that, another 15 miles of incendiary. So it would have completely destroyed any city anywhere. That was its purpose.
Alex, let me interrupt you just a second to say that there is a trainer for this particular Mark 53 bomb that's in building 9731 at Y12. And it is available, well, soon to be available for the public to see. So the largest weapon that we ever made, we have one of them, the case for one of them here in Oak Ridge at Y12.
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting things that Ray has done. I've been through his collection, really interesting photos and lots of historic information for people who are fascinated with this era of American history. And this was when we were nose to nose with the Soviets. They had their big boys, we had our big boys, and cooler heads prevailed, fortunately. The other types of weapons that I was familiar with that I trained on, this was the Mark 55. People are unaware that the nuclear tipped rockets were launched from torpedo tubes, not ICBMs from the back of the SSBN submarine, but any submarine that had a torpedo tube could launch the Mark 55. And this had two yields, 11 kilotons and 250 kilotons. The reason for that is it was both an anti-submarine weapon launched from a submarine. The rocket would fire, break the surface, sail to wherever was his target, fall, break the surface, sink, and then detonate to kill the submarine. Or 250 kilotons, same launch, but detonate over a military installation like a seaport, or at 250 kilotons, it was a massively destructive device. Some of the others, this small, the Mark 57 was a multi-purpose. This could be launched from any type aircraft. It was small enough and light enough that it could be handled by helicopters. And it had several yields. It was a multi-purpose weapon up to 20 kilotons. So this little thing had the same yield as Trinity, packaged with the radar, that the radar is covered with the red nose cone there. The Mark 61, which is still in the inventory, this was the last weapon that I trained on. This is another multi-purpose weapon, very small. It only weighed about 700 pounds complete, a little more than a foot in diameter, and had 4 yields from a base of 0.3 kilotons. That was the primary. And then that would detonate the secondary, and whatever the yield selection was, could deliver 340 kilotons from the same package. These were remarkably technically advanced weapons. The equipment in these weapons, for example, this section right there had 2 little rockets in it. This would be launched from a plane. Here you can see the bungs that would be mounted under wing. The rockets would fire. It would spin the weapon like a bullet in order to stabilize it. Long and sleek like this. This is the radar. This is the fusing unit. Whatever the radar would see, the fusing unit would make the decision of where to impact and when to detonate. If it's a parachute descent, this section would blow off and the parachute would slow the descent. So this design was an extreme penetrator. This thing would penetrate many feet of reinforced concrete. Again, very, very technically advanced.
There is also one of those trainers in the main lobby of the Jack Case Center at Y12.
Okay. In summary, this slide shows This is a Fat Man or a Trinity in bomb form. And this is an atomic bomb. And this was the Mark 17, the biggest. And you can see by the scale man, this was what made the B-36 bomber necessary. The weapons design got smaller and smaller so that you can see that multiple warhead package could be launched in a variety of launch platforms like a BC, the modern version of an ICBM. And these weapons could deliver a series of small warheads. You did not have to have a big warhead. A series of small warheads, each one detonating, would combine with the detonation of the one around it. And small warheads in a pattern would create much more destruction than one massive warhead. So this sort of reentry for these warheads being very small, but still of significant yield, was a change in strategy away from strategic massive weapons that required bombers. These could be delivered by rockets from any kind of launch platform. As a comparison, this shows the 20 kiloton fireball, typical of the blast that blew up Nagasaki, and what you've seen in the Trinity device. This is the fireball of a 1 megaton fireball. And this is silhouetted on San Francisco. So you can see that at 1 megaton, just the fireball alone, not including the mock front and the incendiary capability, would just completely take out a city the size of San Francisco. And if this is 1 megaton, imagine what 9 megatons would be.
Wow. You know, Alex, I want to ask you a question. You talked about you trained on these and you serviced them. What exactly did that mean? Does that mean what did you do? If you can tell us.
There are 3 types of weapons. One is a trainer that it's identical but has no active components. The reason for that is to train people to service them, as well as train pilots to drop these things. Mm-hmm. As they got smaller and smaller, the effect on the aircraft was less and less, but a heavy load dropped changes the attitude of the aircraft. If it's a missile, for example, on a ship, then the ship itself handles the recoil and all that. The second type weapon would be war reserve active. That is a live weapon ready to go. And what our job was at Clarksville base was to take war reserve inactive weapons that would come out of the fleet somewhere, whatever it was. It could be Air Force, Navy, Army, it didn't matter. DASA was responsible for all of the inventory, nuclear inventory in this country at that time. We would receive from DASA instructions for whichever weapon we were to service. We would take the thing apart, and what would make a war reserve inactive weapon is that some component inside expired its shelf life. Everything about these weapons were tracked cradle to grave. Every item, every weapon, and each thing included codes. You had to know what the codes were, the nuclear codes, in order to be able to identify what the weapon was. And it would be coded on the outside. And those of us who serviced these things had to know what those codes were in order to be able to service them properly. So our job was to train, and we would train and become qualified. You qualify on a particular weapon. Then once qualified, would be in the field like Clarksville base that had the responsibility. It was one of 4 nuclear warhead service depots established in this country after World War II. The DASA would keep the records of which weapon was where. When it went into the War Reserve inactive category, then it would have to go to a depot for service. So it would come to Clarksville. We would have instructions from DASA of what to do to take the thing apart and change whatever needed to be changed, and refit with the new whatever it was that needed to be changed, put the thing back together, run it through various checkout procedures. And once that was verified, then that weapon would shift from War Reserve inactive back to War Reserve active, and then go back into the fleet somewhere. We never knew where they came from or where they went. That was DASA's responsibility. Our job was to service them and make them live. And that's what we did.
Wow. Wow. So that was,
So-
that kind of leads us into this next section, Ray, right?
Right,
with
yes,
Clarksville.
the Clarksville base. Let's talk about that a little bit. Alex, if you'll stop sharing your screen.
Okay, I'll
Just
close
go
it.
up to the top and stop it. Yeah.
Uh-oh, did I do
All
that right?
right. You did. You're fine. Now I'm going to share mine and bring this up. And you tell me which picture you want to look at. I'll start with the vault door. Tell me
Okay.
if you can see the vault door.
No.
We don't see the image yet.
All right, wait just a minute.
There we
Now, do
go.
you see it?
Yes. Okay.
All right, tell us what we're looking at.
The way that Clarksville base was engineered was
Alex, let me interrupt you for a second. First of all, tell us, now this is Clarksville, Tennessee?
yes,
It was
Clarksville base, Tennessee.
Yeah, it was Clarksville base, Tennessee. Was that at the, what is the Army?
Yeah.
The,
Clarksville base was
Uh-huh.
established in 1946 as one of 4 service depots established by the Armed Forces Special Weapons Project.
okay,
Each one was established in a different military organization. Clarksville base was positioned inside Fort Campbell,
okay, there
But-
we go.
but inside the border of Tennessee. So that's why it's called Clarksville base, Tennessee, although Fort Campbell headquarters is in Kentucky.
Right. Okay. That's what I just want people to understand that. And I wanted to understand it too. I thought that's
Right.
what it was, but I wasn't sure. So,
Okay, Clarksville base was established in 1946 as Site B. Everything was ultra secret.
Mhm.
There were no names on anything for some number of years. And then it was named by whatever the organization was that ran it. Clarksville base was run by the U.S. Navy.
okay.
Now, how in the world did Navy get established in an Army reservation?
Yeah.
There were no water or ships or none of that. But
Mhm.
those of us who did this work, we were detailed to the Defense Atomic Support Agency. Although we were Navy, we never were allowed to wear our uniforms off base. We had to be in civilian attire. And the base became known as Clarksville Base when the Navy took command.
Right.
And that operated from about 1949 to about 1969.
Okay.
I was the last warhead guy to be shipped out for Clarksville base when it closed as a SALT II treaty agreement.
Right.
And it was turned over to Fort Campbell, and Fort Campbell has since used Clarksville base as airborne infantry. So the name Clarksville base still exists, but it's associated with Army airborne infantry. And I've talked with people who have been there who have no idea what Clarksville base was to
Mm.
start with.
How many at any particular time when you were there, how many weapons would you have on at the facility at a time typically?
Well, the last year that I was at Clarksville base, I was responsible for the entire classified inventory.
Okay.
So I knew where everything was.
Mhm.
And the pictures that you're seeing with the cubicles and things like that, each item would go into a cubicle and it was numbered and it would be tracked. We would DASA would tell us what to do. We would go to whichever cubicle had that thing in it. Back then, all of this looked pristine, not rusty and dirty like it now. It is now. This base was kept in just pristine condition. So we would have to go into the vaults. We'll go through the sequences here that shows the tunnels that were constructed kind of like a mini NORAD facility. That's me standing in front of a vault. Now that looks like a house with a carport. That is actually about 16 feet of reinforced concrete sitting on top of a network of vaults. In order to get into the vaults, that door that you see there at the time, it had two sets of electronics. Two people would have to connect their headphones and give code names to a mysterious voice who I never knew who that voice was. It would open that door. Then inside there was another door. You'd have to do the same thing. And then inside that was a jail cell type network of steel bars, all electrified. You couldn't get through anything without breaking some sort of circuit that set off alarms, and armed Marines would be there instantly.
Yeah.
With live ammunition.
Wow.
So all of this was heavily controlled. This, for example, is one of the bunkers. These were built back into the stone. Imagine what it took from an engineering standpoint to start with stone and just work your way back, in some cases, several hundred feet. To make and then pour reinforced concrete for tunnels and for rooms. There was a small hospital in one of those. This facility is where for example, the Mark 53 warhead was assembled into the B-53 bomb. And this was done by Mason and Hanger. They were a civilian contractor to the Atomic Energy Commission. Clarksville base was an AEC field office. So Mason and Hanger was a contractor to AEC. Once the weapons were built, they had to go to military into the control. And this door right there would open and we would be out here on the apron. Civilians would roll out that brand new B-43, for example, and we would load it on our vehicles and away it would go into our inventory. And that door would close and the people behind that door would go about their business and we would go about our business. And we had a brand new 1 megaton B-43 in our inventory.
Wow.
This facility is where the active components were stored. For example, active fuel, like uranium. We had to, in each of the cubicles inside the vaults, there's like 3 sets of doors, and then you had bank vault doors. You had to know the combination of each of the bank vault doors in order to open up to get into the cubicles. So there was multiple layers of security, and all of this was very tightly controlled. So we would, whatever the instructions from DASA was, we would go get we would have the weapon, we would go get the components, they would arrive at our facilities. There were 2. This is an example of what the inside looked like. I could have held the camera a little more straight, I guess. Those are the vault doors. But these were high ceiling, very extensive engineering involved. And all this was done in solid rock.
Yeah.
They
Wow.
have to cut all this back into the rock faces and then pour all this reinforced concrete and make all of these things and install all these doors. That's an example of the end of a tunnel.
Hey, Alex, let me ask you a question. Do you know how, while this facility was open and doing its work, what it was doing, do you have any idea how many weapons went through there?
Yes,
How
I
many?
do.
Okay.
There was a study made some years ago that concluded that Clarksville base serviced about 3/4 of the nuclear weapons in the U.S. arsenal during its existence.
Wow.
And since the base closed in 1969, there have been no service since then. So this is me on a visit back in 2006 to the facility that I had access to. I was responsible, and myself and another guy who had the same clearance level that I did, we would have to go through into the vaults, verify every item. One of us would read off the number and we'd verify it in our inventory sheets, and then we'd read it back to verify that it was done. And we would go from every week we did this, go from cubicle to cubicle to cubicle. Everything in there was controlled to that level.
Wow.
So Alex, you and I tried to arrange for a tour up to this area, and we didn't get it done, but do you have any idea if any of this is going to be possibly preserved and open to the public? I mean, this is historic Cold War artifacts that we're looking at here. Do you have any idea if it's ever going to be available for public access?
I doubt it. It is inside an active military reservation.
Yeah.
If a person wants to see some of this, they can go to Fort Campbell and get a visitor pass, but they'd have to ask to go, where is Clarksville base? How do I get there? And it's not, if you read the history of Fort Campbell, which I have, there is no mention of Clarksville base at all.
Wow.
And in fact, historically, Clarksville base was established inside Camp Campbell right at the close of World War II. Camp Campbell was an Army designation for a temporary facility. The thinking was that they would sequester all the land necessary for World War II, and then after the war, they would give it back to the farmers. Well, when the Armed Forces Special Weapons Project was established and put Clarksville base inside that reservation, Camp Campbell, temporary Camp Campbell, went to permanent Fort Campbell. So the reason that Fort Campbell is Clarksville base, and people there don't know that it even existed.
I guess after they put that in there, they couldn't very well give it back to the farmers.
That's true. The facilities are there, and I myself and another person who was stationed there with me, we just the reason my photo is there is we were just retirees going back to old haunts and driving around and looking at things. Most everything is derelict.
Yeah.
As you can see, it's not been maintained. One of the shops, the shop that we did the B-53 service in, that had big cranes and all kinds of heavy equipment, the Army is using that for something. And when I talked to the MP guards there and told them what that building was before, they were flabbergasted. I'd never heard anything like that.
Wow.
Right. Well, Alex, I don't want us to give up. I want you and I to go and tour Clarksville base. So you maintain your contact there, and if you can get us access, I would really love to go. And Keith, talk about hidden history. Haven't we had it today?
We hit the jackpot today when we're talking about hidden history. That's for sure. Yeah, that was fascinating, Alex. We really appreciate it. That was great.
We do.
It was a very intense time. No mistakes. There was no camaraderie. They did not want any camaraderie. We were always and continually warned that guy next to you may be KGB. Don't get too close to him. So there's been no reunions. All the people who were there, there was about 30 of us who were warhead guys, and everybody else was just support. And nothing has come of it. There's no historic organization. There's nothing. So Clarksville base is gradually being reclaimed by the forest.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's right.
All right.
Well,
Well, thank you so much. We really appreciate that, Alex. That's a great presentation. I know people are going to really enjoy,
Yep,
have
my
enjoyed
pleasure.
watching this.
It's a very interesting part of my life.
I bet. I bet. We'll have you back another time to talk about Thunder Road.
I can do that.
That
yes,
sounds great.
we'd love to do.
That would be great. That would be great.
Yeah,
Wayne, go ahead.
I'll schedule, yeah, I'll schedule that with Alex and we'll do that. I know we're going to do one more of these programs before your film festival. Gonna take a short break during the film festival, but we've got Steve Jones coming next week to talk to us, and his family lived in Hall Ridge. He can talk about what was there before the Manhattan Project, and just from his family's existence there and having to leave. And then, of course, he's been involved with the Clinton 12. You made the documentary film for that and worked with Steve on that, and helped to establish the Green McAdoo Cultural Center in Clinton. So we look forward to having Steve talk to us next week or next program.
Next time.
And then we'll take a short break. But
the 24th. I think that's the 24th.
Yes, that'll be the next.
We'll do that, and then like you said, I've got the film festival coming up in September, and so I need a little bit of time on the weekends to work on that. So we're going to take 6 weeks or so off to be able, but we'll be back full force after that by the end of September. So
one of the questions that you asked, I failed to answer.
Okay.
And that was the number of weapons at Clarksville base.
Uh-huh.
The sorts of weapons that I trained on included the Mark 54 suitcase bomb. Now that was for clandestine placement, like SEAL teams that get in to blow up a dam or a building or a complex. That was only 200 tons, and it weighed 37 pounds, and it was easily handled in an aluminum case, like a camera case.
Mm-hmm.
That was the smallest. The biggest was the B-53, as I mentioned, and then all of the assorted weapons in there. The Clarksville base itself, at the time that I was there, had hundreds of these weapons in all of these different configurations for every launch platform the U.S. military had. We serviced all of them.
All right.
Keith, you'll remember that Y-12 made the secondaries for all the nation's nuclear weapons. Over 30,000 of them were made during the Cold War. So they were at these 4 depots around the nation, but also on submarines and B-52s. But 30,000+ of them were made, and they're all coming back and being disassembled. Well, not all of them. The ones that are not in the active stockpile are being disassembled, and the secondary is coming back for storage at Y-12.
Right.
And it's an amazing story. And Alex was right in the middle of handling those weapons when they were live. So hidden history for sure.
Hidden history. All right, folks. Thank you for watching, and we'll be back again in a couple of weeks.